let's talk a little bit about Julian Assange. This has been really like a 10-year, I guess, saga.
Hmm.
Um, there's, it is, I have found the sort of like the case against Assange to be really difficult to get a hold on what's going on there, because there has been sort of like there was the original case that involved Chelsea Manning and her essentially, well, this is in dispute, I guess, on some level, leaking to WikiLeaks these State Department cables and some footage, very famous footage of from Iraq of
Hmm.
U.S. military hitting people who were just going to basically help an injured person.
Like a
Um,
Reuters photographer, and yeah.
yeah, and which is just as a side note, I feel like we see footage like this every day now coming out of Gaza,
Mm.
and it doesn't make any type of splash whatsoever. Um, and I remember at the time there was a lot of controversy as to like whether this was, a public service at all, because that has something to do with it. Like if you're, if it is newsworthy, that's how news outfits
Mhm.
have always justified taking top secret material and publishing it. And there was two elements of that. Was it newsworthy, and how much sort of national security damage did it do? In terms of the newsworthiness, everybody, I mean, I was doing MSNBC on a bi-weekly basis at that time, doing Radigan's show and a couple others. And every time they'd be like, is it newsworthy? And then the next story they were talking about came from those cables.
Right.
Like literally, like every news outlet for years were
Yeah.
developing news stories around this right next to their is this newsworthy stuff that was leaked. It's like, are you kidding? This
Yeah.
was it was clearly newsworthy.
And
Um,
almost any book today written about any foreign policy issue, it relies on those cables.
I mean,
Like
it
they
was
continue
and
this stuff in that
internationally
story.
too. Every day
Mhm.
you could look into like the German headlines, the Italian. I mean, it
Mhm.
was all over the world, and it was clearly and
It helps
it
spark
was
the Arab Spring.
yes, and
Yeah.
it was never clear to me that there was any type of like real compromise of like U.S. national security
Right.
assets, although that was a claim in the charges brought against him. But then there was subsequent to that, there was another round of stuff that had to do with like the DNC and whatnot. So what just give us a broad overview. Ultimately, the plea deal that he made is not great from a press freedom
Right.
perspective, but just walk us through this.
So at least a jury didn't, from a press freedom perspective, what we can be grateful for is that a jury did not find him guilty, and an appeals court did not affirm a jury's guilty verdict. Like the only thing that was proved is that if you keep somebody in a maximum security prison in the UK facing extradition for years, they will eventually be willing to plead guilty for their
Right.
freedom. So, from that perspective, I think this week was a win for press freedom, even though he did end up pleading guilty. Now, on the question of 2016, that actually didn't even show up in the entire underlying indictment. He ended up only pleading guilty to one charge, but even if he had pled guilty to every single thing that he was indicted for, 2016 didn't come up at all. It was only the Chelsea Manning situation, and they also dropped the publishing charge, which is like that's good from a
Press
like
perspective.
press perspective. Like four or more of the charges were for publishing classified information, and you're like, no, that's not a crime. Like that has never been a crime. it is like neither you or I have ever like signed any paperwork to get classified, clearances that I know of. I certainly haven't. Maybe you have.
I couldn't say.
And so, we're not restricted from publishing whatever we want. It's the First Amendment. And also, he's not even American. He's been to the U.S. like once to hold the press conference. That's the other bizarre thing about so many people who call him guilty of treason or a traitor. Right. It's like, am I a traitor to Saudi Arabia? Like, what are you talking about?
Right.
Like, he's Australian and he's barely ever been here. So there was this exchange that he had with Chelsea Manning, and this is the thing that they get him for, but it's so thin. He's chatting with her on the chat that they later obtained, and she said, basically, I've sent you everything I can find. Like, if I find anything else, would you be interested in it? And he said, and it sounded like lawyerly. He said, in my experience, curious eyes never run dry. Like, and you can ding him for the like purple prose a little bit. But what he's saying is the same thing that all journalists say all the time. Yeah, I'm always interested in new information. They used that line to say that he was now kind of assisting her in this,
or directing her, or soliciting her to do this, as opposed to being in just receipt of it.
But the journalists always solicit. Like, that's what we do. Like, we ask for information, and the idea that we're just going to sit here just waiting, like, that's not serious. So the other thing they came after him for, or she said, well, if I go back into the system, they're going to know it was me, and then I'll get caught. And he's like, well, maybe we can figure out a way to cloak your identity when you go in there. And that's where they say, well, now he's a hacker.
Right.
Because he tried to help with this. But to me, what about when Woodward and Bernstein, said, all right, let's meet in the parking garage, or I'm going to put a plant, famously, they're like, if I have a plant so to the left of my apartment, that means meet me in the parking lot. If it's to the right, it means I can't meet, or whatever. Like, they had their signals set up. Today, we use Signal, we use Proton Mail, and we tell sources how to use Signal and how to use Proton Mail if they don't know how to already use those. That's just basic source protection work. Now, happens to be a little bit more sophisticated in what he can recommend when it comes to source protection. But if you go to like the New York Times or other places that have secure drop, like, there will be instructions on there about how to use secure drop to securely leak to the New York Times. Does that make them hackers complicit in?
Well, the difference between we can protect your identity from your contact with us versus we can protect your identity from your contact with
and that does get dicey. There are conservative lawyers who would tell us at the Intercept, like, don't do that.
Right. I mean, like, that becomes.
I have a looser like First Amendment rule around that, but you're right. It's
that's a grayer area. But he said that lawyerly thing, and it reminds me, like, we had a guy at Air America who I think it's public knowledge. The guy's been arraigned at the very least in Guam. He had a controversy about a bunch of other things. And I remember asking, like, one of the other executives who was there after this guy left, like, what was the deal with that guy? And he goes, my lawyer has said the best way to avoid litigation is to say this: I would not let that guy clean my toilet with a toothbrush. And that was like, he didn't want to say anything other. It was all just sort of like, there was some structure to that statement that said that he was, kept out of litigation. And so we have this now. Where is Assange in terms of like his relationship with WikiLeaks? Is he going to go back and start again at WikiLeaks? Has he been managing them from afar? And what has been the evolution of WikiLeaks, over that time? Because, I think there was, people forget that WikiLeaks was also the ones who leaked the stuff about the and this was a scandal way before I even heard the word WikiLeaks. I was aware of the scandal about supposedly British scientists working on climate change were faking climate change, and because of the nature of stuff that was leaked. People forget that WikiLeaks had released that stuff. That was one of their early things that they had done. And there's definitely been sort of like what seemed to be selective leaks at various times that are not as much about transparency as I think like at different times their mission has been.
I don't know how much he's been involved. I don't think he's been involved much. And also his from talking to we've interviewed his brother on our program a number of times. From talking to him, his mental health has been deeply compromised by the isolation that he's been held in over the years, his physical health and his mental health. And so I think it remains to be seen, like what role he's going to take at WikiLeaks going forward. It'd be interesting to see if his release kind of brings WikiLeaks back to the fore when it comes to leakers. I think whistleblowers stopped thinking of it as the place where they were going to take information, even though it was still going.
Right.
It just without him, it just didn't have the same punch. So we'll see. Maybe it comes back.
From your perspective, and I haven't followed this as closely as I had maybe 5 or 6, 7, 8 years ago, or more. Has WikiLeaks' mission altered or been consistent, or how would you characterize their mission over the years?
What he has said, and I think it's worth considering this. Like, so he was whacked in 2016 for, why didn't you leak Hillary? Why didn't you leak Donald Trump's emails? Like, why didn't you go after the Republicans? And what he said at the time was, we publish what we get, and like, as an investigative journalist, I understand that.
Right.
Like, I'll often have people say, why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? I'm like, I'd love to do that. Like, give me those documents. But like, these are the documents that I have. And so when now he also made an argument, and we reported on this at the Intercept. He had an argument for why it was better for the world if Trump won than if Hillary won. And he hated Hillary. Like, there's no question, like, those things are true. But it's also true that if he doesn't get leaked those emails, he doesn't do Hillary's emails. Like, he didn't go out hunting for them. And so what all journalistic operations can fall prey to is, they are a vehicle for other people's agendas.
Right.
Like, that's the case, whether you're talking about leaking the Pentagon Papers or anything else. Like, it's just like, that's inescapable. But he's also somebody with outspoken opinions. And I think the public has a hard time kind of reconciling those two different things. Now, would he have leaked Trump's emails? I think so, because I think above all, he's somebody who loves to break news. I think if he had gotten that, and then the other vulnerability for this entire system is statecraft. Like, and I think in ProPublica, the Intercept, the Consortium for International Journalists, or whatever it's called, who got the Panama Papers, like, are these coming from citizen whistleblowers? Are they coming from intelligence agencies? I think some of the leaks that we've gotten have come from various intelligence agencies. Can't prove it, but I suspect
and they have an agenda. Like, we want to discredit this.
We don't
part
like
of
the
our
Emiratis,
government or that
like,
government or whatnot. Wasn't there any type of contact between WikiLeaks and the Trump, if not campaign, those who orbit the campaign? I mean, that to me seems to be the most controversial stuff in terms of like where Stone, like, look, I get the idea of like, I happen to have an opinion that I don't like this politician, and maybe that's why somebody knows that I'm a good person to distribute this stuff, but I would have distributed it, if I had gotten other stuff. I get that. I mean, it's better to keep your opinion to yourself in that way, so that you don't, you can't be, people don't have don't think that question, why your motive's there. But it's another thing to also, in some way, give a heads up to that other candidate or their team that, like, hey, this is dropping, so use it. It's one thing to be used by a source, because that's always a danger. It's another to allow yourself to be used by the players, particularly in advance, it seems to me.
Yeah, I'd have to go back and look at the exact details of that, but I feel like there was some communication with Donald Trump Jr. Like, it's a tiny amount.
And Stone, I think.
And there was definitely Roger Stone was claiming that he had some contacts, and you always have to take everything Roger Stone says with a grain of salt. He had that famous tweet where he said, "Podesta, your time in the barrel is coming up." That, like, don't do that.
That's a pretty good guess.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I tend to think that why, that's a pretty good guess.
Yeah.
So,
and why, like, Roger Stone's such a moron. Like, why are you even saying that? Also, like, they didn't need, like, WikiLeaks, even if they were trying to help the Trump campaign, like, teeing them up and tipping them off, like, what does it even help? Like, it's a bunch of clowns running that operation.
Well, I know, but that's not the way you assess
the principle
right?
is the principle is right. You don't want to be coordinating.
No, that to me seems really suspect. I mean, all the other stuff aside, people always, your sources always have motivation to doing this, and I would say probably.
I don't think we'll ever get to the bottom of what happened with Roger Stone. Like, it could have been several layers of, like, removed that had heard rumors from WikiLeaks. I think it's pretty clear they weren't coordinating directly with Roger Stone, but Roger Stone has tentacles everywhere and, like, picked something up and is always trying to look cooler. Like,
well, there's no doubt in my mind that Stone has, like, a memoir in a safe that he's waiting until he's dead, but I still don't know that we could believe anything in there anyway.
I know that's the saddest part.
Yep.
Like, it'll be fun to read, but we won't know if any of it's true.
Yeah, exactly. I'm curious about how his role in the Elliot. What is it, Spitzer?
Spitzer.
Spitzer, yeah, Spitzer.
Him and Trump is the interesting story. Like,
Spitzer and Trump.
No, that Trump and Roger Stone was even, like, Trump had, like, that's the word that, like, there was some, like, the two of them together were, like, going after Spitzer.
Oh, I'm quite convinced that it was actually, like, some of the people from Citibank, and there was a couple of those bankers who had been looking for a long time to get Spitzer. And
they had the wires, right? I mean,
the
Fed had them too. Yeah.
It was the what do they call it? Structuring the withdrawals to get to $9,500 on Friday, and then $9,500 the next week, or something like that.
Right, and you're the bankers, and you look at that, it looks a little suspicious, and you're like, wait a minute, is that the guy who's trying to take us down?
Oh, no, I don't think the way that works. I think it was the bankers have the bankers and Stone had, I would say, private investigators. They probably tracked all that stuff, and then they figured out. Then they reverse engineered how do we make it like somebody else flagged this, and that's and start it that way. That's I'm convinced about it, but that's for another day. Ryan Grimm, sad day, because I think Bowman was a good congressman and a smart guy. I remember interviewing him when he was running in that race. I guess it was in in the run up to 2020. And I was really impressed with him. He was he was an educator, and just seemed to be very attuned to, like, educators can be very sort of like a nuanced thinkers, and I thought he was good. I would love to see him run against Richie Torres. That would be great. From your mouth. Ryan Grimm, DC Bureau Chief at The Intercept, co-host Counterpoints, also one of the best dressed on the. I mean, in the YouTube world, you could be one of the best dressed these days.
Well, I owe it all to you.
In the YouTube world, I mean, let's not
fix my tie.
Yeah. Yeah. Incidentally, I was going to say your knots are looking a lot better. Sometimes it takes a carrot. Sometimes it takes a stick.
It's a village.
Ryan Grimm, thanks so much for your time today. Appreciate it.
All right. See ya.
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.